integrating something that's not just talk therapy. Let's, just talk it out. That's like, actually, let's look at how your brain is delegating these things or processing through these things. And so that's where I think, therapies like this are really just key.
I'm a different person. Like, I'm able to be myself. I'm not anxious all the time. I'm not stressed all the time. I'm not putting all this pressure on him, right? And so that's also why we always say the parents do it first, because there are countless families that have come for their kids. Then we say, start it yourselves. And just by the parents doing it themselves, the kids' symptoms and challenges start to go away. And they're like, what happened? This is magic. We're like, no, it's not magic. It's nervous system co-regulation. It's the way that we work as humans.
This is what we're seeking to do at In the Cortex, is give parents the tools to take this information and do it at home on their own time, and not to outsource to everybody. Having chiropractic care is so amazing, but when you're in the middle of the night at 9 o'clock at night and you're having a 911, you can't call Dr. Ham and be like, can you come over and help me, right? You want to give parents the tools to be empowered to say, I can help you through this.
All right. Well, Dani and Paloma, hopefully I said that right. Welcome to the Unfiltered
Thank
Healing
you.
Podcast.
We're so excited to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is fun. I've only had a couple where I had like multiple guests, so it's fun for me to kind of like popcorn back and forth. And, this is my official meeting of you both. So I'm excited for that, and also to gain, some wisdom regarding what we'll be talking about today, not only for my practice, but also for our audience and parents to have some resources today. So it's going to be really great. Before we dig in today, I personally really enjoy hearing people's stories of how they arrived at where they are, because for me, it's a testimony. And I think it can often help people just hearing the journey. So I'd love to hear a little brief history about how you both arrived at the place you are now, having built the company that you're in.
Yes, I love sharing this story because it is such an amazing path that's been guided. And I love that I've been able to trust the path. So I was somebody who had a really disorganized brain, and we'll explain what that means in a little bit. But I basically was the hot mess express. Like, I literally was late to everything, a disaster. Like, even this mic mishap before I got started would have literally just stopped me dead in my tracks and been like, I guess I'm not doing it now. I don't even know how to move forward through this whole situation. Um, and so I just thought that was me. I thought that was my personality. I have an older brother who had every developmental diagnosis put onto him. He had been labeled with ADD, ADHD. Autism wasn't happening as often back then, but I know he would have landed on the spectrum. And he was always the kiddo who was being, my mom was one of those really amazing moms that was like constantly searching for information and trying to help him. So he was always the focus, and he was always the one that had all the attention put on him, and constantly seeking answers to help him with his anger and why is learning so hard. And I was the one that was overlooked in the background, that was just kind of like, oh, I'm just struggling over here. And everyone's like, you're fine. Just try harder and get over it. And I was like, but internally, I'm a disaster. I guess this is me. That's who I am. So anyways, I was really good at sports. I got recruited to play field hockey at a Division I school, and I was given a scholarship, and I played all 4 years, cried every single day, practically, just because I couldn't handle the stress of being away from home halfway across the country. I went to Miami University, and being at a really top tier university, and then also having the demand of playing field hockey, which was physically hard. And then I remember graduating college, and I had the mindset, and I had so much grit already built into me that I was like, well, if I can do that, then I can do anything. So then I went off and moved to another country. I lived in Ecuador for 2 years, and it was also challenging to my nervous system because there was a lot of threats that were actually real. And then I actually was like, okay, I need to come home. And then when I got home, I was like, what am I doing with my life? Where do I go? What do I do? And I've always had this love for coaching, love for people, and wanting to help people. And I remember finding a person who was doing brain reorganization in Encinitas. And so my mom's like, why don't you email her? So I shot her off an email. But before I did that, I was doing ABA therapy and working with kids that have autism. And I was like, this is not for me. This is not my calling. I am not going to continue with this. It's not for me getting to the root of really helping someone. And that is not to knock that modality. It just didn't resonate with me. And then I found brain reorganization, and as I was listening to the presentation, because the woman was like, "When you come in, I never have a place to hire somebody, but like there's someone leaving, and let's just see if you're a good fit." And I listened to her opening presentation, and she described a disorganized brain, and I was like, "That is me." And I identified with every single thing on the list. And I was like, I always thought something was wrong with me. And it finally felt like I was heard for the first time in my life. And I was like, wait, I am not crazy. I'm not making this up. I am just this person. So I was like, I have to learn what this is. So I worked there for 3 years and I became one of the leads there. And then it got to a point where I was like, I'm going to go start my own. And Paloma had come in about a year after I was working there, and she was an intern there. And then I ended up just quietly leaving. And then she found me again and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then I was like, "Why don't you come be my intern and I'll teach you everything I just learned and I'll do it a lot differently." And then so she was my intern for 2.5 years in San Diego. And then I had my first child. I have two kiddos, a 9-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. And then the rest has kind of just evolved into what In the Cortex is today. But I'll let
Well,
Paloma
it's
share her
actually very
story.
similar to Danny's story, so that's why we love this because just those mysterious things that happen, you're like, it's all for a reason. So same as Danny, my brother always had a lot of learning challenges, a lot of physical challenges in terms of like coordination. He couldn't ride a bike, reading, writing, making friends, everything that kids are supposed to do was real. And I say that with air quotations, by the way, for anybody who's listening, was really hard for him. And so my mom was the same. He was always at a new therapy. She had always like flown him out here, flown him out there to do this new modality, and nothing was working. And when he was about 17, we were like, okay, what's going to happen with this guy? Like, he's younger than me. So I must have been about 19. And so we were like, okay, let's figure something out. And we just happened to go to San Diego for Christmas because my mom's from San Diego. And she connected with a friend of hers from a long time ago. She was just talking about her kids, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, you should bring him in. Like, bring both of your kids into my center. And we're like, okay, cool. And so we went into the center in Encinitas, and she made us do these weird movements where she made us drag ourselves across the floor and then crawl like babies. And then she proceeded to tell us exactly how both of our brains worked. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is this magic? And of course, suffice to say that this was Danny's former boss as well. So I became completely obsessed with this. My brother ended up doing that program online because we live in Mexico City. We did back then. And he ended up doing it for about 6 months, and it completely changed his life. I mean, this is a kid who didn't know his times tables when he was 17 years old, and now he's 32 years old. He lives alone in Australia with his partner. He has a company that he just started. He's worked for all these different politicians. I mean, he's such an organized brain. He has more friends than anybody that I know, and he's somebody that when you meet him nowadays, you would never know the challenges that he had, right? So seeing that transformation was really, really, really inspiring for me. I had been studying business just because I was like, I guess, what else are you going to study? I just didn't know what else to do. And so I learned about this and I started reading about this stuff. And so I ended up getting the internship, meeting Danny. And then a couple years later, I became her intern. I had started a business here in Mexico. I closed it and I was like, I'm just going to go learn about all the brain stuff with you. And the rest is history. I also worked at some schools with kids with autism, and I learned all about ABA therapists. I gotta say, I was a very good ABA therapist, but it was the same thing where I was like, we're not really getting to the root with these kiddos. And while it was the most fulfilling thing ever, because those kids, I will never forget any one of them. I love them and I still think about them all the time. I knew that there was something else. And so because I knew my brother's journey, I just knew that it had to be this. And we ended up coming together again in 2020. We had both kind of been doing our own thing, brain work wise and brain reorganization wise. And 2020, the pandemic was like, we can't really do anything in person. So why don't we just bring it online together? And that's what it's been since then.
Awesome. Yeah. I think it's really powerful to share that because as we'll talk about in this episode as well, getting in more depth, I think a lot of, especially parents or even adults, as you both were, you don't kind of connect the dots sometimes and you just think that's who you are and you think, or you just don't have resources to properly get to the root cause. And that's what you did. You got to the root cause, which was your brain, causing all these like, outlier things. And so, in the cortex, which is the name of your company, from what I'm sensing, is more of a development of sharing, the knowledge that you've learned, the sharing, the process that you went through, and regaining balance in your brain, and how that kind of changed the trajectory of your life, learning that information. So, for those that may not be, super knowledgeable about the brain, I think, for instance, a lot of moms are going to be watching this episode, which I think is going to be awesome and really powerful to help their kids and themselves. Um, but for those that may not have, some of that knowledge yet, how would you describe what in the cortex means and why we would kind of want our brains operating there?
Yeah. In the cortex, in a nutshell, and first of all, moms who find our content, we always start with there's no shame or guilt that you should ever put on yourself when you start to learn this information, because there's a lot of what we do as moms, especially in today's society of, the highest expectations ever, right? That we put on moms. And we were like, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. I messed up my kid. It's my fault that they're doing this. And we say, ignore all of those thoughts that are limiting you, because that is something that we have to first start at the foundation, because moms are searching for answers. Why does my child always have a meltdown when I ask them to put on their shoes? Why is my child always having such a hard time going from one task to the next? Why is my child always having such a hard time making friends? Why are certain clothes bothering them and the tags are just irritating and they just can't sit comfortably in their chair and pay attention? And so this is where we share the information, and it starts basically in utero, actually even pre-conception, really, because whatever we have in our worlds, in our minds, and what we've experienced, we do bring into our babies. And it's not to say that you can't go back. So there is a really hopeful message at the end. So please stay through this whole part. But babies starting in utero, so much developmentally is going on. And what we're doing is we're starting to bring primitive reflexes online. Primitive reflexes are just automatic instinctual movements that are designed to keep us alive, to put the baby into the correct position so they can come out into the world naturally. And then that first year of life, we're really relying on these automatic instinctual movements, because babies can't walk, they can't talk, they can't do a whole lot. So they're relying on their caregivers to keep them safe. So a lot of the movements that are automatic are designed to help a baby take a big gasp of air, or to roll onto their side, or turn their head so they have a clear airway. So there's a time and place for all these reflexes to come on, do their job, and then to lie dormant. And it's important that they're lying dormant, because when a real survival situation comes at us, and we always give the classic, if a tiger's coming at you, you're not just going to sit there and be like, I wonder if this is going to eat me. You're going to immediately go into a fight or flight or a freeze or a fawn reaction, right? One of those survival responses. And we want it to be a reaction when there's a tiger coming at you. But we don't want it to be a reaction when it's time to put on our shoes or put on certain clothes or transition from one thing to the next. So when those primitive reflexes are supposed to be on, they're supposed to do enough of a specific movement. And this is what we teach you at In the Cortex. We teach you what those movements are. So the brain goes, okay, cool, I got it. It's encoded into my system. I now know what to do when something really is needing to elicit that response. So then at the same time, primitive reflexes have this beautiful symphony going on of being on and then lying dormant and then turning into postural reflexes that need to stay on for the rest of our lives. We also have the lower centers of the brain that are supposed to be doing specific jobs. So from 0 to 5 months of life, we're on our bellies and we're moving across a slick surface. And the way that you move in that pattern, it helps develop the pons. And then we move on to 6 to 12 months of life. And these are all taken with a grain of salt, because timeframes we don't want you to get caught up on. We just want you to get the movements in. 6 to 12 months, typically a baby starts to get up on hands and knees and starts crawling. And then the way you crawl helps the midbrain develop. And so by the time you're 1 and you're supposed to start walking, that's when all that lower brain, primitive brain, should have gotten exposure to certain movements to then know, okay, those are all lying dormant. They're all where they're supposed to be. They've all created enough of this pathway to make breathing automatic, to make regulating my heart rate automatic. My circadian rhythm is automatic because that's all coming from that lower brain. So when we're upright and walking, we're supposed to be focusing on developing our cortex now, not that lower brain coming on and starting to take over. And that takeover looks like a kiddo who's having a meltdown over putting on shoes. Or, and this is like a child with a disorganized brain, like you heard from me and our brothers, becomes an adult with a disorganized brain. So if we're a kiddo who has a hard time putting on shoes or getting called on in class, I then become the adult who has road rage because it just transfers to match how our world is looking. So this is what we do it in the cortex. We recreate that first year of life. We go back, we do the movements that your brain needed in order to have that part lie dormant. So then you can focus on what's being demanded of you in today's world.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Did you want to add anything, Paloma?
I was just going to say one thing that all of this is possible because of neuroplasticity. And so, a long time ago, not that long ago, I should say, actually, we used to think that the brain stopped developing completely at 6 years old. People thought that's your brain, that's your personality, you're stuck with it. And so, truly, neuroplasticity equals hope in my mind. And it truly means that your brain can change at any point in your life. And our brains are always changing without us even knowing, right? Every time we learn something new, every time you take a new route to work, every time you try a new thing on a dinner menu, right? Those are new connections that you're giving to your brain. So what we're doing here in the cortex is just filling in the gaps that you might have missed when you were a little kid, a little baby.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I think I will say personally for me, and I think this is, a conversation we can have as well, but for me, being like a pediatric physician, when babies come in, it's been trained through extra training that I've had to really test those, reflexes as part of the examination. But I will say, being exposed to this more now, which is great. Um, I will say personally for me, I guess it hasn't just really been in the forefront of my mind, when a child or an adult comes in, that's a new person that I haven't seen from a baby. Because as a baby, if they have issues there, like the work that I do usually can regulate that, and so it's not really like something that I think about afterwards. But I will say it has definitely really challenged me for like, older children or, parents that are coming in with this stuff to be like, maybe I should go back and like look at some of those reflexes. So I will say for me, it's been really eye-opening and challenged me to dig that it may not just be that nervous system work, that it may be some of these therapies that you're talking about, kind of re-going back into that process, which I think is super fascinating. Um, Now, I know that you're kind of biased because this is obviously your niche. Um, but would you say, like, you've seen kind of an increase in the need for this type of work? And if there is that increase, is it just because we are learning more about the needs of it, or do you think there's some other factors going on?
That is a very good question. I feel like there's so much there. So we could talk about just this for another 12 hours, but we won't. Let's make it a little shorter than that. But there are many different things. So the first thing is that the criteria for diagnostic is ever increasing, right? So the DSM, I think they're at the DSM-6 now, not the 5, but when I was learning it, it was the 5. I have a master's in neurodevelopmental disorders. So when you look at that book, it's this thick, it's humongous, and a lot of the behaviors that are in that book that help doctors and psychiatrists diagnose a lot of mental health challenges are increasing and increasing and increasing, right? So something that would have had maybe 10 signs to get that diagnosis or 10 symptoms to get that diagnosis now has 50 or now has 90, right? And this is not an exaggeration. There are so many more things. So this comes from one side, like you said, there's more research and there's more knowledge of understanding how the brain can diverge from the neurotypical, right? So Neurotypical, we always say nobody's actually neurotypical. We all have some sort of something going on, right? We have something that's a little bit different from quote unquote what should be the typical, right? But I think as they're learning a lot more about that, they're putting a lot more of these criteria into the diagnosis. So it's easier to diagnose. And a lot of people do get more diagnosis, right? At the same time, every single year, we can see more babies being swaddled, more babies who don't have tummy time who are on their back all the time, more babies who get access to these little jumpy thingies and the little walkers much earlier than they used to. And I do want to say there is an amazing movement of people who are like our people who are coming back to the basics and really going back to the roots and saying, why am I putting my baby in an apparatus all day? Sometimes you need it, right? But I think that these babies that are in these machines all day long are not moving. And that's what the brain needs is the movement, right? And so of course from our perspective we can see these kids aren't getting the movement that they need. And if you compare the charts basically of all the statistics, of course it has to do with the amount of diagnoses of the diagnosis criteria, but it also has to do with the way that people are living, right? So if you look at how did my grandpa grow up when he was a baby, I don't know, he was probably crawling on the floor, biting a chair, falling over in the mud, like he was doing what babies do, right? So we weren't as apprehensive, I think, as adults around, oh no, take care of the baby. Oh no, this is going to happen to the baby. That's going to happen to the baby. Or on the other hand, I'm too busy. I can't deal with the baby. I'm just going to put him over here, right? And we've all understood. I'm not a mom yet, but I've seen it. So believe me, I understand the moment when you're like, I just need to go pee alone, right? So that's totally fine. I think the challenge is when we become reliant on these devices that that's what's truly going to interfere with this development. So that's really our perspective. And then there's a lot of, societal things going on where we're all trying to understand ourselves and be individuals and feel special and feel that somebody sees us and feel that our challenges are not just ours and there are other people out there that have the same challenges and really just getting to see why am I the way I am, right? And I think that this digital age has brought us together, but it also has separated us a lot. And so that separation comes with a lot of like identity crises. And I think that that also plays into this stuff, right? Where if I can understand my identity through a diagnosis, my life is going to feel a little bit better because the human brain always wants to classify things. Think about the way we operate, right? Whenever you walk into a coffee shop, we all have this inkling of like, oh, that's the typical blah, blah, this kind of person. Oh, she's that way. Oh, he's in a bad mood. Oh, she's, whatever. So they're distracted with her phone, whatever we're saying, right? We always want to classify things in our lives because that's the way that our brain understands the world is we want to put things into little categories. And so it's hard for us, especially in the Western world, to understand that some things are just gray area and some things are just, that's just your brain the way it is. And we're here to say that if it is something that's interfering with your life and it's something that is a true challenge, we are here to help. And there's truly so much you can do to feel better.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that is what you touched on is the digital age we live in. And it's really amazing in so many aspects because we get to have this conversation. Paloma's in Mexico City. I'm in San Diego with you, Dr. Hamill, but we can connect, right? But at the same time, we're also so prone, like Paloma said, to putting things into categories, but then we start to compare. And then we start to look at, oh, that baby's doing that and my baby's not doing this. And I fell into this trap fully with my first child where I totally was caught up in how much did he weigh and all these things. And I was realizing I was falling into this world where we need to start comparing ourselves and then speed up the process because so much in our world today celebrates an early walking baby. And we literally are trying to scream from rooftops, let the baby crawl. And people are like, what do I do? Push them down? We're like, no, just bring the party to the floor. If everyone's on the floor together, it makes the baby want to stay on the floor. And especially we see a bigger shift in the older kiddos and the younger siblings. The younger sibling usually developmentally goes quicker because they're trying to keep up with their siblings. So we're also trying to share to just slow down and savor the moment. And it's really challenging in today's world because of so much pressure from outside. But that's what our nice little cozy nook of In the Cortex celebrates is like slowing down, being present, and really helping moms to release those feelings. That's a really big part of our program is to release the feeling that I'm behind, I've done something wrong, and just looking at our children and being so grateful that they're here and they're existing with us, and using this moment to learn from both sides. I've learned so much as a human becoming a mom. And so this is what a big part of the process is. So yeah, we have seen an increase over the years. But the cool part is we've seen the shift in consciousness too. So we're seeing so many people that before, when we talked about this 17 years ago, they thought we were nuts. They're like, what? On the floor? And now people are like, oh, let me see what this does, you know? So there's a shift there.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because, there is on a macro scale, shifts to try to, you know, create this world in a way like, even in the healthcare facility, they're trying to, manage and shift like milestones for children, which crawling would be a milestone, right? And they're trying to like even take that away completely. And so it's all like this, organization in the backstream that's trying to affect the broader message of what is this healthy pattern. And so for me, it also like all of those things you guys talked about are really powerful and really important as well. And I even look back at the way they've changed birth and the way that they've integrated all of these birth things, because I see babies and I'm working on their head and stuff like that. And so um, for me, it's like there's even so much birth interventions now and ways that this natural, beautiful process is a medical procedure. And so, and we're not negating the emergencies that are needed, but it's kind of like, yeah, there's a lot more things that are hindering and complexities of the brain now. And so that's why there's such a big focus on how do we help heal, integrate, organize the brain. Um, what would some therapies look like for a child, for instance? Maybe you've assessed them or the parents have assessed them through the program, and they have like some imbalances going on. So, what would some of those therapies look like for a child?
I want to share that our approach is very different when it comes to how do we go about our process at In the Cortex. And we've been doing this now for many years. So we got to see one way of doing it. And then Paloma and I are always trying to be inventive, innovative, and create new and faster ways to just get those results to you. And what we have found is this is the classic timeline. A mom is searching for answers. She probably finds us on social media. She resonates that her child hits every single one of, a disorganized brain. Then they boil it down to it's retained primitive reflexes, it's lower brains that need to be developed. And then they want to sign up for our program. And we suggest that the mom starts it or the dad start it together. And we say this because it's so important that as parents, we lead by example. And I used to work with Paloma, used to work with kiddos, we would have them by ourselves. We would get amazing behavior. They could do everything we asked them to do. They go home and the parents are like, it's not working. And we're like, well, what's the missing piece here? It's the parent, right? So we suggest, and our program is designed to be online. So we obviously don't know what's happening at home all the time. We do ask and we love to know, but maybe the focus, and we've had to turn people away who are like, here, just fix my child. And our program is not designed to just fix a child. We don't believe that there's anything wrong with your child or you. So we really suggest that the parents take the lead. And we always say to send us videos. So people are sending us videos of what their movements are looking like, and we give feedback. And then we'll tell the parents, okay, your brain is at this percentage of development. You're ready now to show your child how to do these movements. Because there's nothing that will trigger a survival brain quicker than someone who lacks confidence. Because when that parent, it's like if you got on an airplane and the pilot's like, oh, I've never done this before. I think I push a couple of buttons. You're like, get me off this thing. I don't trust you. And that will immediately trigger and elicit that fight or flight response. So when we say to start our program, the parents start it first. They understand the movements. They look simple. And the minute you start doing them on yourself, you're like, oh, I guess my brain needed this, because it will stir some stuff up. You might see some emotional reactions come out. Nothing to fear. It's already stuff that's in you. And then they have an understanding of, okay, now I know how to guide my child. And then we just recreate that first year. So we start with 2 primitive reflexes, the fear paralysis and the Moro reflex, and we start with creeping because that's exactly what a brand new 0 to 5-month-old baby would start on that timeline. And it's all through movement. And we suggest, 3-year-olds can do this program up until 100. So there's really no weight on how old you are. It's just really about the dedication and desire to transform your life. And as long as you have that in you, you can do any of the things that we have in our program.
Yeah, and would you mind kind of explaining, you don't have to go through all of them, but would you mind kind of explaining, with since we're kind of focusing mostly on those primitive reflexes and when they should be on and, when they should be off, which is called retained reflexes, would you mind maybe just giving an example or a couple examples of, what that reflex is and then, what that would mean if someone, for instance, like, retained that, how that can manifest in
Yes,
their
I can
child
take
or
that
an
one
adult.
fully. Why don't we talk about the ones that you were just talking about, Danny, the fear paralysis and the Moro. We always talk about the Moro, and you'll hear why in a second. But let's start with the fear paralysis reflex. This reflex is amazing because it's a reflex that babies have when they're still in the mom's belly. It's an
Mhm.
in utero reflex. And what it does is that if the mom is in a fight or flight situation, if she is in a true situation of danger, the baby has this reflex to know to completely freeze and stop placing demands on the body of the mom so she can use all of her resources to survive. So that's why it's called fear paralysis, right? So the baby feels this fear, completely like freezes, and then once the baby feels, of course, because it's inside of the belly, right? Feels that the mom is back to a calm space, then he can just, or he or she can just go into whatever, right? And so this reflex, of course, if you think about it, in utero, that's great because a mom who's pregnant, who's also being chased by a lion, like Danny was saying, is gonna have a hard time, right? But if her body knows, I have all of my resources available for me to get my baby and myself out of this situation, she's able to do it more efficiently, right? And so I love this. This is a reflex that many animals have as well. We are animals at the end of the day, right? And so this reflex, if it's still on when you're born, what can happen is that you are somebody who has a really hard time when there's a lot of attention on you. When you, for example, if it's you're in school in the classroom and they call your name, Danny, it's time to go present, and you just get deer in headlights. And so we've all either seen a classmate or been there where you're like, "Oh my gosh." And this is the situation where you forget what you're about to say. I mean, you could have rehearsed this speech 4,000 times and the second you get up you're like, "Nope." Right? And so we've seen it, right? It's like even something in movies and stuff. Or you see something dangerous that's happening where you would normally have a fight or flight response. So we say this example for parents all the time that you see your baby, their little tiny little toddler wobbling over to the pool and they're getting really close and they're right on the edge and doop, they fall in. And all the other adults around are like running and jumping in and you're just like frozen looking. And then this leads to so much guilt, right? For the parents. They're like, what's wrong with me? I didn't save my baby, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. It's just your brain still has this reflex. And what we always say is the primitive brain will always take over. So while we want to live in the cortex, which is the logical brain, and we have all of our higher functions there, the primitive brain will always take over because it is designed for survival. So if it ever picks up that you might not be able to survive, it's fully going to take over. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how many deep breaths you take, no matter how much you count to 10, right? So we always remind people of this because they say there's something wrong with me. I don't understand why I keep reacting this way. And it's like, well, it's not your fault. It's genuinely just your brain, right? So that's one of the reflexes that Danny was mentioning, and a lot of people don't and a lot of other practitioners don't look at this reflex, a lot of people that work with primitive reflexes, because it's theoretically meant to integrate within the womb stage still. So when babies are born, they don't have this reflex anymore theoretically, and it's meant to turn into the Moro reflex, which is the next one I'm going to talk about. But if a lot of pediatricians probably don't even hear about this one because there's no way to really test for this specific reflex. So that's one of those things where you're like you said earlier, if you don't know about it, how would you, think about testing any of these things? And so the other reflex that we love to talk about is the Moro reflex. The Moro reflex, you probably have heard about it for sure before. It's anybody who's in the baby world has definitely seen this too, where a baby, if there's a really loud noise or if there's a change in the position of their head, their arms and legs will flail out and they come back in and they get really red and start crying and they kind of turn into a little ball, right? And we've all seen that little flail of their arms. And this reflex is the only primitive reflex that actually takes into account all of our senses to turn it on. So it can be with a really bright light, it can be with a loud sound, it can be with an unexpected touch. Sometimes parents or teachers or caregivers get a little bit upset when kids don't want to be touched or they don't want to be hugged. And a lot of the time, it's just their brain. Their brain doesn't know how to handle it, right? And so this reflex is hyperreactive in that sense, or makes us feel hyperreactive in that sense, because what it's doing is it's constantly helping us scan our environment to see if there's any sort of threat, right? Again, brand new baby. There's a huge, loud bang. I'm 2 months old. I'm just going to start. I want this reflex to turn on so I can start screaming and crying, and my mom can come to help me, right? Once my mom or another caregiver comes, picks me up and says, shh, 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 it's okay, you're okay. Then my brain understands, okay, that thing, that sound is not that scary, right? It's not a scary sound. But on the other hand, if it was a dangerous situation, the baby's gonna come and grab the mom's gonna come grab the baby and run out the door. So the baby knows, okay, that was actually a dangerous situation. That's how we're starting to learn to calibrate what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. And that's why we say early childhood trauma plays a lot into this stuff. Because if you're living in a place where there's a lot of stuff going on, I'm not going to get into details, but that baby is going to be hyper reactive and it's always going to be that survival situation, right? And so this reflex is also designed to, if you see a very bright light, what could that be? Thinking of a brain 30,000 years ago when we were living in caves, fire, right? So our brain is designed to see a really bright light and say, be like, oh, no, 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 this is scary. I'm going to scream again, right? I want my mom to come help me. And so that reflex in that moment of time is fantastic. It's so great because it's helping, like I said, understand our senses and understand when we're safe. However, a lot of times this reflex becomes retained. And so what that looks like is somebody who is either hyper reactive to everything, meaning they go from 0 to 100, they get really angry. They have really intense physical reactions to things. So if you kind of like that person that we were saying, if you come up and like kind of touch them on the arm, they'll be like, hey, get away from me. They might even punch you, right? Like it's really just this like hyper reactivity. They hate any bright lights. They going into Target, going into any, fluorescent lighting, they're just like, they immediately are just in the worst mood, right? Or it's the other side when they're really, really shy and they don't want to talk to anybody and they're kind of like in their little bubble. So the way that I think about it, and I just thought of this right now, is like you're either in this expression where you're out, your arms and legs are out, and you're like, ah, or you're in the little ball expression, right? Where you're like, no, nobody look at me, nobody talk to me. I'm so scared. These people have a lot of sensory challenges as well, right? Again, any age. But a lot of kiddos that have a lot of sensory issues have a retained Moro. And these are also the kiddos that are going to become, actually in both profiles, and adults, because we all know somebody, they're the ones that are going to become very controlling. So these are the kids who are like, I'm going to play and I'm going to tell you guys all the rules. And if you don't follow my rules, then I'm not going to play anymore, right? Or they're super, super rigid with their scheduling. They don't like transitions. They don't like anything new or unexpected. So if you were on the way to the park and the park was closed for whatever reason, meltdown, right? You know that that's going to set them off. And so imagine what that feels like, right? Being so hyper reactive to everything that's going on in your world. It's so exhausting. And the thing is, too, when we're turning on these primitive reflexes, we're turning on all of our survival mechanisms, which includes flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, which have their place in time. There's nothing wrong with those chemicals. I think a lot of social media like makes us think that cortisol is bad. It's not bad. There's a reason it exists, right? It's actually good in many situations. But if you're constantly flooded with it all day long, your adrenal glands are exhausted. Your entire system is completely exhausted all the time. And so that just feeds into this loop of being dysregulated often.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really brilliant. And I think so many, because we are hit with so many things now, that cortisol is a really big thing that's talked about, because for a lot of people it's very dysregulated. Um, and it kind of goes back to, how's your brain really perceiving things? And I'm I'm assuming that because, with specifically like the moral reflex, like you were talking about, or that the fear one, since a lot of these can also develop as a result of, trauma, for instance, whether physical or emotional, that as you go through these, therapies of kind of going back, there's also going to have to be some of those things addressed, as far as truths or lies or whatever it is that you're going through in the process. So is that something that is also kind of either integrated or that comes up? I know you said when you do these things, like, emotions can come out, which same happens in mine too, which is a good thing. You hold trauma in different areas of your body. um, so is that something that you process them through as well?
Yes. And it's so when we go through all the primitive reflexes in the lower brain, we then say, okay, your brain's out of survival mode. By the time you get to module 7 of our program, it's 12 modules total. We start to talk about a process called the reconnect. And that's something that is proprietary to In the Cortex. And we've just turned it into a way of being able to identify when there is some sort of a limiting belief. Because oftentimes when trauma happens, you start to create a narrative on how you need to act and how the world is. And so we start to look at, how do you want to shift it? And we're really big believers in the epigenetic piece. And so if you can shift the way you think about your reality, then you can go back and shift how things happen to you. And like Dr. Gabor Mate says, it's not the trauma that happens on the outside, it's what's happening inside of you. And so if we can shift that piece of what's happening inside of you and you can make a different story, then it shifts the trajectory of how your life ends up going. And Paloma and I are really open and vulnerable in our program with all of our members, and we share things that we've gone through and we talk about how we work through them. And we are human and we have so many thoughts, and our subconscious is really in charge of 95% of everything that we do and say and are in our day-to-day life. And so if 95% of us is being run by a subconscious program in some capacity, then think about all the little things that are happening every single day that you're not even aware of you're doing, right? So our program really does highlight and bring a lot of awareness to what's going on in your day-to-day life. And then you realizing you can be in the driver's seat and you can actually shift how you are looking at life. And for so long, I had no idea I was a major codependent person. And it took me 40 years to really have that moment of like, oh my gosh, everything I've ever done in my life was run on a codependent um, program that I had within me. And so as I broke through that, and it was all done through movement, and that's what the reconnect is we walk you through 5 different steps. We help you create an affirmation that is really deciding how you want to live your life instead. And it was me being able to feel safe on my own. That was really a big piece for me. And trusting myself. I never trusted myself because for so long in my whole early childhood, I was told that I was fine when I knew I wasn't. And I was like, oh, I can't trust myself because I'm saying I'm not okay, but people are telling me I'm okay. So what's going on? So this is a lot of what we bring up in our program, but we don't do it until your brain is ready to start to process it. And this is why we always share that we suggest starting with this piece first, whether you do it with us or somebody else, but really looking at the foundation of how you're wired neurologically is really important, because then nothing can really land on you and being able to shift how you're actually operating. And so many people are in this, world seeking spiritual guidance and all this stuff. But then when it comes down to the moment, they're like, it's all out the window. When I'm in that stressful emotional conflict, I don't have any access to my cortex and I start saying and doing things that I don't want to do. And it keeps creating these same clashes. And it's because your nervous system is wired to go back into those, like what Paloma said, like there was something that shifted in my environment. I either explode or I hide. And this is where you start to go, oh my gosh, my people pleasing is actually my fear paralysis reflex. And once I integrate that, then I'm actually able to face this conflict and actually do it in a healthy way that's not screaming and yelling at somebody, right? And then learning how to create boundaries. So there's so much that comes through this process, and it's not just get on the floor, do some movements, cool, life is great. There's such a gigantic emotional component. And it really does take that diligent effort to want to work through it. And it takes a lot of bravery because it isn't easy to face a lot of stuff a lot of times. But we are both now in the space where we can even just think of something that's limiting us, and now we can just shift it and move through it in minutes. And it's
Right.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a couple questions regarding that, but, the first thing is that's how I run my practice as well. We always focus on the brain, and then we move into these things, and it's really important, I think, for people to know that because, um, there are a lot of, brain retraining programs now, which are great. I think a lot of them are focusing on that kind of category of the subconscious beliefs, which is great. Um However, I am in line with you ladies that, uh, if the brain is kind of stuck in that pattern, a lot of times what I see in my practice is they've done some of those things or they just they can't move past something because something is literally, stuck or they're holding it somewhere that's stuck. And so I think that's what's beautiful about this integration, especially for kids. Like, we all
Mhm.
need to move, but movement is so big for development in their brain and body and posture and all of these different things. Um, and so integrating something that's not just talk therapy, let's, just talk it out. That's like, actually, let's look at how your brain is, um, like delegating these things or processing through these things. And so that's where I think, therapies like this are really just key and will be really so helpful just integrating both of those things together. When there's like the baby crying it out method of your face of of that as well, which is hard to kind of be on one line or the other. Um, what are some other not to like, we don't wanna like spew out all of these things because we're human. But what would you say are also some, like general things that people may not know of that could also be, hindering some of these
I think
adaptations
one of
that
the
we kind of
biggest things is we're
process?
always focused, and we just talked about this recently on a webinar. We're always focused on the what, and we're not looking at the why or the how. So we're focusing, for example, on a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old who's having a hard time with handwriting, right? And so we're saying handwriting, handwriting, handwriting. Let's work on handwriting. So we go to an OT, we go to all these different therapies, and we help the kid understand how to put the fingers around the pencil and how to do this letter and then how to write that letter and all these things, right? And then we're not focusing on why was that kid not able to do it from the beginning? Wh- We're just assuming that by teaching them to do that one specific skill, we're helping the brain, right? Because that's the way that we think. And again, there's no criticism here. This is just the way that we think in our world, right? Nowadays. And we're not focusing on how is he compensating or she compensating so much so far to be able to make it now, right? To be able to learn to write now. So a lot of the approaches are top down. A lot of the approaches are let's focus on the skill. What are the specific skills that we want for ourselves and for the kiddos? And we're going from the top down. So we're focusing on that specific thing. And in doing that, we're ignoring all of the other mechanisms, right? And so what we always say is this is just kind of like a further along example. When you have a baby as a new parent, again, I'm not a parent yet, but I work with so many parents. And the main thing is forget about the what. Let your baby figure it out because guess what? Babies are really good at figuring things out. We don't give them enough credit. Babies are really smart. Babies get what's going on. Okay. They might not be able to speak it yet with their words or conceptualize it the way that we conceptualize it, but they understand what's going on. And so if we stop worrying about, like Danny was saying, the weight, oh no, the what weight is my baby? Are they latching on? All these things, which of course are important. But if we stop focusing on that and more focus on enjoying the time with the baby, Dr. Greer Kirschenbaum talks about this all the time. We have a program that we did with her, and she has opinions on the cry it out method, by the way. But it's focusing on what does the baby need? Am I seen? Am I heard? Am I loved? Am I supported? Right? That's what babies and kids, and honestly, all of us want or need, right? So, as long as you are giving the baby that, the rest will get figured out, whether in that first year and a half, 2 years of life, or later on. You can give us a call. We'll get that kid crawling and everything will get organized in their brain, right? I think a lot of what we always say is release this pressure because we have so much pressure from all the expectations of all the things that, like Danny said, you're comparing and you're also reading this book that says, okay, by 2 months this, by 3 months this, by four, oh no, it's 4 months and a half and he hasn't done this. Let's take a deep breath. And again, let's go back to basics. Do you think that, hundreds of years ago, the moms that were in the caves were reading the book and being like, oh, your baby did that before mine? No, let's just live our lives, right? So ultimately, let's live our lives and let's make it fun for the baby too. Like, I feel like a lot of parents have that question that you were saying, Danny, where they're like, my kid wants to walk early. What should I do? Just push them down on the floor? It's like, no. First of all, never push your children. I'm happy to say one of our mottos here at ITC, never push your children, right? But just see what they want. If they feel like they're trying to get up really early, right? What do they want? They want to hang out with the adults, right? What are the adults doing? They're standing, they're walking, they're sitting on high chairs. Let's bring the party to the floor. Let's all hang out on the floor. It's good for your brain. It's good for the baby's brain. To make them understand that there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because the baby has that same programming too. Talking about epigenetics, the baby has the programming that you have without even knowing it of, oh, gotta get there first, gotta be just like everybody else. I don't want to be behind, right? And they're just a baby. So if we start to help and create an environment where they can just be themselves and exist, the rest will figure itself out.
I gotta share. I was a really what you call like a crunchy mom before I was even like planning on having kids. So I really did a lot of like following the money. Why would that person want me to have this thing? And I had always like, okay, there's obviously that going on. So I really went down lots of rabbit holes and became very convicted in my beliefs of like, I'm not going to vaccinate my babies because I was just like, I don't see the point. I trust immune systems. They're there for a reason. I also went down like even circumcision rabbit holes. And I was like, how do I feel about that? And I really did a lot of deep diving. So I went into a lot of different avenues and wanted to figure out, why am I being told to do these things? And if you have done them, there's absolutely no judgment. It's just what felt resonated with me. And what I found, I did a lot of research on. And I feel like now I'm in this space where I can share it. I used to be terrified to tell people this stuff because of all the judgment I'd get about me. Like I remember my dad even being like, I can't believe you're not going to circumcise your son. And I was like, but tell me why we do it. And and I would just get into debates all the time. And now I'm just like, this is how I feel about it. And you can agree or not agree, just scroll on it, right? And I don't tell parents how they should do things. I just say, here's my evidence. Here's why I do what I do. You make your own choice. So once I did that before I had kids, I knew exactly like what route to go. I had 2 home births. I actually delivered my daughter on my own. That was not on purpose. She just came really fast, which was very shocking. But then what I really realized is like even having all this knowledge, right, of like doing things the natural, healthy way, my son still had a retained symmetrical tonic neck reflex. He still had a retained ATNR. Like he still had, even though their births went according to plan and it was so beautiful and it would have been, post on Instagram, it's like the perfect birth. I had fear inside of me that I was not capable of doing so many things. And I think for me, my biggest message, what I share with moms, dads, anyone who wants to have children, is that you really have to look at and be so open to knowing that once you have a child, it's not just like, I'm going to have a kid, check off the list, go here, do this, do this. Having a child is opening the door for you to learn about yourself and to go, oh my gosh, my child has come into my world to teach me more, to humble me in seconds. Like, because your kids will just say the thing that you're like, I can't believe you just said that out loud in public. Wow. Okay. Yes, I have said that before. So there's no, like, you can't hide. And so that has been my biggest thing is like, for example, my son played baseball and I was a Division I athlete. So of course I'm like, of course my kids are going to be great at sports. My son got up to bat and he was jumping out of the batter's box. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's afraid of the ball. Like, what are people going to think of me? Right. And like that was my cue to go, okay, girl, go check out your ego. Go look at what's coming up for you. Why are you going to try to tell your child to go fit into something to make you feel okay about yourself? And so that was my, like, aha, and that's where I was like, I love helping parents through that because I've lived it. I go through it every day where my children will present something, and then I have a choice. Do I just shove them into it and make them be okay with it even though they're not, or do I teach them how to work through something that's challenging? And I think there's such a beautiful movement going on of conscious parenting. There's a lot of parents that are ready to hear this. And then there's a lot of parents that are like, no, I'm not ready. And that's okay too. Right. And I think that having the space in today's world to have two opposing beliefs and being respectful of each other is something would love to see in humanity is like allow people to have their opinions, allow me to go on my path and do what resonates with me, find people who also are agreeing with that. And if you don't, I don't need you to write me a message and try to get me to convince me. But because I used to do that to people, right? I was like, you're wrong. Let me prove to you why you're wrong. And then I would spend hours debating things online and getting into things. And all it did for me was feed that adrenaline rush that my system craved, right? So I think for the biggest thing for me right now is really looking at where are you at as a parent before you step into parenthood? What are your reasons? And getting so clear of why you want to have children. And not saying to not do it, but to just be really intentional behind it. And I think if more parents can really own that and have accountability and like why we're doing what we're doing, it will remove that workload that our children have to take on. Because I feel like I have been like and I'm not saying anything bad about my parents because I know they did the best that they could, but what they had, and like it's all passed down ancestrally. But I'm also like, I want to make it so my kids are like skyrocketing earlier, like ready to like take on the world on their own without being dependent on me. So I think that for me, I wasn't really concreted in that idea before I had kids. I was totally on board with just checking the boxes, get married, have kids, do all the things. And if I could go back in time, I would have set more intention into it. But I'm getting it now. So really, time doesn't matter.
Yeah, we all have a process. We all have a process we go through, and yeah, there was a lot of really powerful things in what you just spoke. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that will really be helpful for individuals to kind of work through because even how I found out about, looking into these reflexes more was chiropractor friends of mine who, did all of the things that they knew to do, and yet they had one of their children was really struggling. And so, it caused them to look into some more of these things and also to let go of a lot of things. And so, more is not always better, better is better. And so it can be really impactful and helpful to have grace with yourself. Grace is a beautiful thing, and we only know what we know, and then there's grace. So yeah, thank you for sharing those parts. I think that will be really helpful to also give um, words of wisdom for parents, and children are a blessing, and so it's integrating these things together. As we kind of finish up our discussion here today, there's so much more I have to talk about, but I know we're coming to a close. Do you have like maybe just a couple of some of your favorite cases or stories briefly over the years, maybe integrating this maybe for a child or an adult? You already talked about yourselves, but do you have a couple like, really like testimony cases you're like,
I
wow,
mean, I can
this is
talk about one
amazing.
that I had recently in Mexico who was amazing. This woman who signed up, I will say most of my clients in Mexico, our clients in Mexico are more mine because they come to me in person, right? So in the US or in the English program, we have people from all over the world. But here, because I'm from here, it's mostly people that know me or that I know and that I've started to come in contact with since I got back to Mexico. But she actually signed up randomly, just online, clicked it, signed up. I was like, cool, new person in Mexico, sounds great. And she sent me a bunch of videos of her and her husband creeping and crawling, doing all the movements. Like at the very beginning, they were on it, like really on it. They completely changed everything in their house so they would have space to creep and crawl and do all these things. I mean, they were really, really on top of it. This was back actually, oh, now we are in September. This was in September of last year. Okay. And I, kind of keep in touch, but people are living their lives. So sometimes I'm like, when they're ready to tell me, share something, they will. And I could see that they were participating in some of the things on the community and like submitting their assignments, blah, blah. And then one day, I want to say it was in February or maybe March, I got a voice note. They had a kid when they started the program. It was the two parents and one boy who was 5. He might be 6 now, but he was 5 at the time. And he didn't talk. He didn't have any verbal language. So he communicated, but there were no actual words that he could produce at that time in his life. And so it was very frustrating for the parents. I think he had maybe 10 words, the basics, right? And again, typical, super smart, super, super sensitive, super creative, intuitive, just like such a wonderful, wonderful little boy. And that's why the parents ended up joining. And they did what we recommend, which is they did it themselves before they had him join in. February, I get a voice note from this cute, tiny little voice. Hi, Paloma. How are you? I miss watching your videos. I hope you're doing great. This is me, his name. I was like, I immediately start crying. I was like, what is happening? And he had only been doing the program for like 3 months and he had already trying to speak a lot of the, accommodations that he had in school. He didn't need them anymore. And the mom, I mean, the parents were like, our lives are changing. Like, it's not even just, of course it's about the kid because it's the kid, but they were like, I'm a different person. Like, I'm able to be myself. I'm not anxious all the time. I'm not stressed all the time. I'm not putting all this pressure on him, right? And so that's also why we always say the parents do it first, because there are countless, Dani, countless families that have come for their kids. Then we say, start it yourselves. And just by the parents doing it themselves, the kids' symptoms and challenges start to go away. And they're like, what happened? This is magic. We're like, no, it's not magic. It's nervous system co-regulation. It's the way that we work as humans. And that, I mean, that for me was one of the most amazing stories. And I love that kiddo.
I love that. And that story though is replicated time and time again. So it's not just like one kiddo that starts talking. We have heard this over the years that we've been doing this consistently. And we're never here to say that we're curing anything. We're not like, oh, we cure ADD or autism or whatever. We're just giving you the foundation. And again, like Paul mentioned, that book that, classifies a diagnosis, it's all based off of behaviors. And so we're looking at behaviors and they just so happen to line up with primitive reflexes and lower brain. And when you address that, then that behavior isn't showing up as often. One of my favorite things is not only my own transformation in my personal life, but being able to I'm now in San Diego doing this work with kiddos. We have a micro school that we started. I have been homeschooling my kids since they started school. And so now we're transforming how we look at education and learning. My son would never have sat down at a chair and listened and learned and done all these things. And so we were missing the power of other children around us. So we created these communities, but I kept noticing communities would implode on themselves because, again, we didn't all have that neurological foundation to handle the conflict. And so I was like, with one of my friends, we decided to just go for it. Let's start a pod, let's start a micro school, and let's just see who wants to join. And we didn't even advertise it. We have 14 kids now from 4 years old to 9 years old. And we are doing it in a way where we're addressing the primitive reflexes first, and we're helping parents see a completely different approach to education. They never sit longer than 20 minutes. They're constantly moving. They're playing games. And to see that transformation, it's only been a month and a half. And to see how these kids have already transformed, the kids who had a hard time saying goodbye to mom and dad are just eager to drop off and come join. And one of them. And so that's the goal, is to give them the tools to enjoy learning. Because like the Scandinavian cultures, they actually don't even start reading and writing until they're 7, when the eyes are working with the brain. And so we're really following the model of like, how does the brain learn best? And it's through movement, and it's through having fun and playing and being silly. And it's it's bringing so much life to my life to be able to guide these children, because it's so much fun. And we have the tools to help us get through the day. So there's not that consistent, he took my pencil, he's touching me, he can't. and what teachers,
Yeah.
someone just said, do you know why a 30-year-old teacher looks like she's 80? It's because it's hard, right? It's
Yes.
constant correcting behaviors and putting out fires. And
Mm.
this approach has completely shifted how we're educating. So I'll keep everyone posted on how it goes. But I just want to share this last thing, and this is what our community is about, is we have parents that chime in and share with us their wins. And one mom just wrote, my daughter hated, and she put that in caps, math for years. It doesn't come naturally for her, and she sees how easy it is for her siblings. She said that they did several reconnects the other day for it, and she doesn't remember what they were, but they were around liking math, releasing her negative feelings about math. And she's like, it's been truly amazing to watch the 180 change take place. She used to not be focused and whine about math, and it took her forever to finish her assignments. Now she's focused, gets through her assignments, and cheerfully does her work. And she says, it's amazing. Getting rid of those negative thoughts and replacing them with positive thoughts is life changing. And so this is what we're seeking to do In the Cortex, is give parents the tools to take this information and do it at home on their own time, and not to outsource to everybody. Having chiropractic care is so amazing, but when you're in the middle of the night at 9 o'clock at night and you're having a 911, you can't call Dr. Hamill and be like, can you come over and help me, right? You want to give parents the tools to be empowered to say, I can help you through this. And so that's our vision within the cortex, is to create more experts in the brain and nervous system so they can help themselves and then start that transformation everywhere they go.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I really feel like God is going to use this in such a really big way. And it's just going to start exploding. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, ladies, this morning, for sharing some of your thoughts, your vision. And we just pray that it continues and it grows because children are the future. And so we need healthy minds and healthy brains. And so thank you again so much. I know you ladies also have your own podcast that they can listen to. So if you want to shout that out, and then maybe where people can find more information to either work with you directly or just more information, you can say that here.
Yeah, of course. Our podcast is just the In the Cortex podcast. Our Instagram is in the Cortex underscore
Mhm.
US. Our TikTok is in underscore the underscore Cortex. Our Facebook, I will admit, we're not super active on Facebook, but if you are, our Facebook is in the Cortex US, and you can always send us an email. Yeah, at hello@inthecortex.com. It's the two of us behind the scenes, so one of us will get your email, and but I know that there's a lot of questions that come up with this. So if you also check out the links in our Instagram page, you can set up a 15-minute call for free, and that's where you'll get a lot of your questions answered. And we're starting our next group coaching on Monday, the 22nd. So if you are listening to this podcast after that, you can still join. We're doing 3 months of coaching, group coaching, going through the program together so that the parents feel like you have that guidance and you have that accountability too, for pertaining to a group. And that, if you're interested in that, that's also in our links. And we're going to make a promo code that's just Dr. Rachel, so you can use that to check out whether you want to do the group coaching. That's going to be with Dani in English, or I'm starting one in Spanish as well if you're a Spanish speaker on the same day. So Dr. Rachel promo code will apply to that. But also, if you're more of a self-guided learner, we have our regular program, which is $47 a month, and you still get access to 2 group coaching calls per month. And yeah, we're always excited to listen. So please don't think that it's too much to reach out and ask us questions. That's truly, we love answering questions. So please send them over.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, ladies, again so much. I will put
Thank you.
all of that information in the bio for you guys all to keep up with that. And thank you guys all for listening. And we hope you have a blessed day, and we'll catch you on the next episode.